The moment I stepped through that mahogany door, I knew I had made either the best decision of my life, or the worst mistake imaginable. Patricia Whitmore's face twisted into something between a smile and a grimace like she had just bitten into a lemon, while trying to pose for a photograph. Her eyes traveled down my simple navy dress, my modest flats, my drugstore earrings, and I watched her mentally calculate my net worth and find me worthless. She leaned toward her son, my fiancé Marcus, and whispered something she thought I couldn't hear. But I heard every word she said. I looked like the help who had wandered in through the wrong entrance. And that's when I knew this dinner was going to be very, very interesting. My name is Ella Graham. I'm 32 years old and I have a confession to make. For the past 14 months, I've been keeping a secret from the man I was supposed to marry. Not a small secret. Like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming it on the dog. Not a medium secret. Like the fact that I still sleep with a stuffed animal from childhood. No, my secret was that I make $37,000 a month. Before taxes, it's even more obscene. After taxes, it's still the kind of number that makes accountants do a double take and ask if there's been a mistake. I'm a senior software architect at one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. I've been writing code since I was 15, sold my first app at 22, and I've been climbing the corporate ladder ever since. I hold 3 patents. I've spoken at international conferences. I have stock options that would make your eyes water. And Marcus thought I was an administrative assistant who could barely afford her rent. I never actually lied to him. When we met at a coffee shop 14 months ago, he asked what I did and I said I worked in tech. He nodded like he understood, then asked if I handled the scheduling for the executives. I smiled and said something vague about supporting the team. He filled in the blanks himself, and I just never corrected him. Why would I do something like that? Why would I let the man I was dating, the man I was falling in love with, believe I was struggling financially, when I could have bought his car 10 times over? Because I learned something a long time ago, from the most important person in my life. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed when I was 7. She lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, drove an older car, shopped at regular grocery stores, and never wore anything flashy. She taught me to cook simple meals, to appreciate small pleasures, and to never judge my worth by the number in my bank account. What I didn't know until she passed, when I was 24, was that my grandmother was worth several $1,000,000. She had built a small business empire in her youth, invested wisely and chosen to live, simply because she believed that character was more important than appearance. She left me everything, along with a letter that I still keep in my nightstand. In that letter she wrote something I've never forgotten. She said that a person's true character only shows when they think no one important is watching, when they believe you have nothing to offer them, when they think you're beneath their notice. That's when you see who they really are. So when Marcus invited me to dinner at his parents' estate, when he hinted that this might be the night, things got serious. When he mentioned that his mother was very particular about first impressions, I made a decision. I would give the Whitmore family the test my grandmother had taught me. I would show up as the simple, unassuming woman they expected. I would wear modest clothes and drive my old car, and speak humbly about my circumstances. And I would watch how they treated someone they thought couldn't help them, someone they thought was beneath them, someone they thought had nothing to offer. And before you judge me, before you think I was being manipulative or deceptive, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what your partner's family really thinks of you? Have you ever had that nagging feeling that the smiles are fake and the compliments are hollow? Have you ever wanted to know the truth? Even if it might hurt, I wanted to know. I needed to know because I wasn't just considering marrying Marcus. I was considering marrying into his family. And families, as my grandmother also taught me, are forever now. Before I go on with this story, I just want to take a quick moment. If you're enjoying this so far, would you please hit that like button and drop a comment, telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love reading those comments. Seeing people from all over the world tuning in at all hours. It means more to me than you know. Okay, back to the story. The Whitmore estate was exactly what I expected, and somehow still managed to surprise me with its success. Driveway alone was longer than some streets I've lived on. The gates were wrought iron with gold accents, because apparently regular iron wasn't pretentious enough. The lawn was manicured with the kind of precision that suggested someone measured each blade of grass with a ruler. As I drove my 12-year-old Subaru Outback up that pristine driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Simple makeup, hair pulled back in a low ponytail. My grandmother's small gold studs in my ears, the only jewelry I wore. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong here. Perfect. Marcus met me at the door with a kiss that felt slightly performative, like he was doing it for an audience. His eyes flicked to my dress, my shoes, my lack of accessories, and I saw something in his expression that I had never noticed before. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by how I looked. I filed that observation away for later. Inside the house was a monument to new money, trying desperately to look like old money. Crystal chandeliers hung from every ceiling. Oil paintings in gilded frames lined the walls, though I noticed they were prints, not originals. The furniture was expensive, but uncomfortable looking, chosen for appearance rather than function. And there, standing in the foyer like a queen surveying her kingdom, was Patricia Whitmore. She was in her early 60s, with the kind of face that had clearly seen several excellent surgeons. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect helmet that probably required industrial-strength hairspray to maintain. Her dress was designer, her jewelry was real, and her smile was absolutely, completely fake. She extended her hand to me like she was granting an audience. I shook it and felt the limpness, the dismissal, the complete lack of warmth. Then she made that comment to Marcus, the one about me looking like the help, and I smiled and pretended I hadn't heard a thing. The evening was about to get very interesting indeed. If I had known what I was walking into that night, I might have worn armor instead of a navy dress. But then again, I've always believed that the best armor is information, and I had done my research. The Whitmore family owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states, not the flashy luxury brands you see in movies, but respectable mid-range vehicles that appealed to regular families. Marcus's father, Harold, had inherited the business from his own father, and had spent the last 30 years expanding it. Patricia had married into the family at 23, and had immediately set about climbing the social ladder, with the determination of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. They had 2 children. Marcus, my fiancé, was 34, and worked as a marketing manager at a company that had nothing to do with the family business. This was apparently a sore point with Harold, who had expected his son to take over the dealerships. And then there was Vivian, the older sister, who was 38, and treated the family fortune like her personal piggy bank. I had found all of this through public records, social media, and a few well-placed Google searches. I had seen photos of lavish parties, society events, and charity galas. I had read articles about Patricia's philanthropy, so a closer look revealed that most of her donations came with significant tax benefits and publicity opportunities. None of this had prepared me for meeting Vivian in person. She arrived 20 minutes late, which I would later learn was her signature move. Making an entrance was more important than being respectful of other people's time. She swept into the living room, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, with diamonds dripping from her ears and neck, like she had fallen into a jewelry store and come out covered in merchandise. Her greeting to me was a single word, delivered with the warmth of a frozen fish: hello. Not hello, nice to meet you. Not hello, Marcus has told us so much about you. Just hello, with a slight curl of the lip that suggested she had smelled something unpleasant. I smiled and said hello back. She turned to her mother and began a conversation that pointedly excluded me, discussing some charity event and whether the florist had been fired yet for last month's debacle. I stood there holding the glass of water I had been offered, feeling about as welcome as a vegetarian at a steakhouse. Marcus hovered nearby, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. That was the second observation I filed away. Harold Whitmore was a different creature altogether. He was a large man, the kind who had probably been athletic in his youth, but had since surrendered to the comforts of wealth. He shook my hand with a grip that was meant to be impressive, but just felt tired. His eyes were shrewd though, and I noticed him watching me with something that might have been curiosity. There was another guest at this dinner. Someone I hadn't expected. An older gentleman named Richard Hartley, who was introduced as an old family friend and business associate. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When he shook my hand, his gaze lingered on my face, with a flicker of recognition that confused me. Did I know him? Had we met somewhere before? I couldn't place him, and he didn't say anything. But throughout the evening, I would catch him staring at me with that same puzzled expression. Patricia led us into the dining room, which was decorated like someone had been given an unlimited budget and zero taste. The table was long enough to host a royal banquet. The chairs were upholstered in what I assumed was real silk, and the place settings included more forks than I had ever seen outside of a restaurant supply store. I counted them. There were 6 forks at each place setting, 6 for a single meal. I've seen surgeries performed with fewer instruments. Patricia noticed me looking at the silverware and smiled that frozen smile of hers. She said she supposed I wasn't accustomed to formal dining, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I said that my grandmother always taught me that it's not the forks that matter, but the company you share the meal with. Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Vivian snorted into her wine glass, and dinner began. The first course was some kind of soup that I couldn't identify, but that probably cost more per bowl than my weekly grocery budget. Patricia used this time to begin what I would later think of as the interrogation. She asked where I had grown up, and I said a small town in Oregon, which was true. She asked about my family. I said my grandmother had raised me, which was also true. She asked what my parents did. I said they had passed when I was young. Patricia made a sound that was supposed to be sympathetic, but came out sounding like a drain unclogging. She said how difficult that must have been, growing up without proper guidance. I said my grandmother provided all the guidance I ever needed. Vivian leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light from the chandelier overhead. She asked what my grandmother had done for a living. I said she had been a businesswoman. Vivian's eyebrows rose slightly. She asked what kind of business. I said small ventures, nothing too exciting. The truth, of course, was that my grandmother had built a company that she eventually sold for several $1,000,000. But that wasn't the kind of truth that would serve my purpose tonight. Patricia moved on to the next topic. She asked about my current job. I said I worked in tech. She asked if I was a secretary. I said I was more of a support role. Patricia nodded knowingly, as if this confirmed everything she had already decided about me. She said that was nice, that every team needed support staff. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but still said nothing. And that's when Vivian decided to bring up Alexandra. Alexandra. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, sending ripples across the table. Vivian said the name so casually, as if she were mentioning the weather or the quality of the soup. She said she had run into Alexandra last week, that she was doing wonderfully, that her family's business was thriving. I watched Marcus's face carefully. Something flickered there quickly. Hidden guilt, nervousness. It was gone before I could identify it. Patricia picked up the thread, with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this opportunity. She said Alexandra had always been such a lovely girl, so accomplished, so well suited to their family's lifestyle. She had been Marcus's girlfriend for 3 years. Did I know that? I said I didn't. Patricia smiled. She said it was such a shame when they had parted ways. Everyone had expected them to end up together. Alexandra's family owned an import company that dealt in luxury vehicles, which would have been such a perfect match for the Whitmore dealerships. The implication was clear. Alexandra had been the right choice. I was not. I looked around the dining room and noticed, for the first time, that there were photographs on the wall behind me. I turned slightly in my chair and saw a gallery of family moments, Christmases, birthdays, graduations, and in at least 4 of those photographs, a beautiful dark-haired woman stood next to Marcus, her arm linked through his, her smile radiant. Alexandra. Patricia followed my gaze and said nothing, but her satisfaction was almost palpable. Vivian twisted the knife a little deeper. She said Alexandra was still single. Actually, such a surprise that no one had snatched her up yet, almost like she was waiting for something. Or someone. I turned back to the table and smiled. I said she sounded like a remarkable woman. This was clearly not the response Vivian had expected. She blinked momentarily, thrown off balance. Patricia recovered first. She said yes. Alexandra was remarkable, and then, with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, she added that she hoped I wouldn't feel too out of place in their world given my more modest background. I asked what she meant by modest. Patricia's smile grew teeth. She said she understood that not everyone was born into certain advantages, that some people had to work ordinary jobs and live ordinary lives, but there was no shame in being common. Common. She had called me common. I felt something shift inside me, but I kept my expression neutral. I had come here to learn the truth about these people, and the truth was becoming very clear indeed. Marcus finally spoke up. He said his mother didn't mean anything by that she was just being protective of him. Patricia patted his hand and said of course she was protective. A mother always wants the best for her son. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air like smoke. And you are not the best. Harold cleared his throat and attempted to change the subject. He asked about my hobbies, whether I had any interests outside of work. I said I enjoyed reading, hiking, cooking simple meals, nothing fancy. Vivian laughed and said that was adorable, like a child listing their favorite activities. Richard, the family friend, spoke for the first time since we'd sat down. He said he thought there was something to be said for simple pleasures, that his own grandmother had lived a modest life, and been the happiest person he had ever known. Patricia shot him a look that could have curdled milk. Richard ignored her and continued looking at me with that strange, searching expression. He asked what my grandmother's name had been. I said Margaret Graham. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more, just nodded thoughtfully and returned his attention to his soup. The rest of dinner continued in much the same way. Patricia and Vivian took turns asking questions, designed to remind me of my place, which in their minds was somewhere far beneath them. Marcus occasionally made weak attempts to defend me, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Harold stayed mostly silent, watching the proceedings, with the tired resignation of a man who had learned long ago that arguing with his wife was pointless. And through it all Richard watched me. By the time dessert arrived, I had learned everything I needed to know about the Whitmore family. They were snobs of the highest order, the kind who measured human worth in dollars and social connections. They saw me as an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. A mistake Marcus had made that needed correcting. But I had also learned something else, something I hadn't expected. Marcus was not the man I had thought he was. The Marcus I had fallen in love with was kind and attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in me as a person. But this Marcus, the one who sat at his mother's table and let her tear me apart without a word of real protest, was someone different, someone weaker, someone who cared more about his family's approval than about defending the woman he claimed to love. I wondered which one was the real Marcus. I was about to find out after dessert. Patricia announced that we would have coffee in the sitting room. The men drifted toward the windows to discuss business, while Vivian excused herself to make a phone call. Patricia said she needed to speak with the housekeeper about something, and would join us in a moment. This left me alone with my thoughts and a perfect opportunity. I excused myself to find the bathroom. Marcus pointed me toward the back of the house, down a long hallway lined with more pretentious artwork. I walked slowly, taking in the details. The house was impressive from a purely financial standpoint, but it felt cold, empty, like a museum that no one actually lived in. The bathroom was easy to find, but I wasn't really looking for it. What I was looking for was information, understanding, some clue that would help me make sense of the evening. I found something much better. As I walked past a partially open door, I heard voices, Patricia's voice and Vivian's. I stopped. Every instinct told me to keep walking, to respect their privacy, to not eavesdrop like a character in a soap opera. Something in Patricia's tone made me pause. Something sharp, urgent. I moved closer to the door, staying in the shadows. Patricia was saying that we needed to deal with this situation quickly, that Marcus couldn't be allowed to make this mistake. Vivian agreed. She said she couldn't believe he had actually brought her here, that she had thought this was just a phase, like his vegetarian period in college. Patricia said this was more serious than a diet. This woman could ruin everything. I felt my heart beating faster. They were talking about me. Of course they were talking about me. But what came next was what really made my blood run cold. Vivian said the timing couldn't be worse. She said they needed the merger with the Castellano family to go through. And Marcus needed to be with Alexandra for that to happen. Castellano, that was Alexandra's family name. The luxury car importers. Patricia agreed. She said the dealership was in trouble, that they needed the Castellano partnership to survive the next fiscal year. I felt the floor shift beneath me. The Whitmore dealerships were in financial trouble. I had suspected something from my research, but this confirmed it. Vivian continued. She said Marcus was supposed to keep Alexandra interested while they worked out the details. That was the plan. Alexandra's family would invest in the dealerships, and in return, they would get access to the Whitmore distribution network. Patricia said Marcus had assured her that he was keeping his options open with Alexandra. Options open while he was proposing to me. I leaned against the wall, my mind racing. This wasn't just snobbery. This wasn't just a family who didn't like their son's girlfriend. This was calculated, strategic. Marcus wasn't just a weak man who couldn't stand up to his mother. Marcus was using me, but for what? Why keep me around if Alexandra was always the plan? Vivian answered my unspoken question. She said Marcus was such a fool. He actually seemed to like this little secretary, this nobody. He was supposed to use her as a placeholder until the deal with Alexandra was finalized. But he was getting attached. A placeholder, that's what I was. A placeholder, a distraction. Someone to keep Marcus occupied while the family worked out their business arrangements. Patricia said they would handle it. She said they would make the engagement announcement tonight, get Marcus publicly committed to this girl, and then find a way to break them up before the wedding. Once they had Alexandra secured, they would discover some terrible secret about me that would justify ending the engagement. Vivian asked what terrible secret. Patricia said they would invent one if necessary. I stood in that hallway frozen, listening to two women plan the destruction of my relationship, like they were planning a dinner party. And then Vivian said something that made everything even worse. She said at least the girl was too stupid to suspect anything, that Marcus had picked well. In that regard she was naive, trusting, probably just grateful that someone like Marcus had noticed her at all. Patricia laughed and agreed. I stepped back from the door, moving silently down the hallway. My hands were shaking, but not with hurt. With anger. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was naive. They thought I was so desperate for love that I would accept whatever crumbs they threw my way. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I found the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not broken. She was not devastated. She was thinking, I had come here tonight to test Marcus's family, and they had failed spectacularly. But the test had revealed something I hadn't expected. Marcus himself was part of the problem. He wasn't just caught between me and his family. He was actively deceiving me. The question now was what to do about it. I could confront him. I could walk out there right now and tell everyone exactly what I had heard. I could create a scene, expose their plans, and leave this house forever. But that would be too easy. Too quick. They would dismiss me as emotional, dramatic, bitter. They would tell themselves that I was just proving their point about me. If I was going to respond to this betrayal, I would do it my way, on my terms, with a plan that they would never see coming. My grandmother had taught me many things, but one lesson stood above all others. She said that when someone underestimates you, they have given you a gift, the gift of surprise. Patricia and Vivian had just given me the greatest gift of all. They had no idea what I was capable of. I fixed my makeup, smoothed my hair, and walked back to the sitting room with a smile on my face. The game was just beginning. When I returned to the sitting room, something had changed. The furniture had been rearranged slightly. The lighting adjusted. Patricia was standing by the fireplace, with a look of barely concealed anticipation. Harold had positioned himself near the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Vivian was pretending to examine a painting, but I caught her glancing at Marcus with a smirk, and Marcus was standing in the center of the room, looking nervous, too nervous. He turned when I entered, and his face broke into what was supposed to be a loving smile. He walked toward me, took my hands in his, and said he wanted to ask me something. I felt the trap closing around me. Marcus said that he knew we hadn't been together very long, and that his family could be a little overwhelming at first. But he said he knew what he wanted. He said he wanted me, and then he got down on one knee. The ring he produced was large and flashy, exactly the kind of thing Patricia would approve of. It was also, I noticed immediately, of questionable quality. The diamond was cloudy, the setting uneven. It was the kind of ring that looked impressive in dim lighting, but would reveal its flaws in the harsh light of day. Much like the man holding it, Marcus asked me to marry him. Behind him, Patricia was beaming. This was clearly the plan, the first step in their strategy. Get Marcus publicly committed to me, then find a way to dispose of me later. In the meantime, they would use the engagement to keep Alexandra waiting, dangling the promise of Marcus, while they worked out their business arrangements. I understood all of this in the space of a heartbeat. I also understood that I had a choice to make. I could say no, I could reject this proposal from a man who was using me, in front of a family who despised me. I could walk out with my dignity intact, and never see any of them again. But that would end the story too soon. I thought about what I had heard in the hallway. I thought about their plans to invent some scandal about me. I thought about how they saw me as stupid, naive, disposable. And I thought about how satisfying it would be to show them exactly how wrong they were. So I said yes. Marcus slipped the ring on my finger, and Patricia began clapping like she was at a theater performance. Vivian offered her congratulations with all the warmth of a January morning in Alaska. Harold shook Marcus's hand and told him he had done well. Richard caught my eye from across the room. There was something in his expression, something knowing, like he suspected that this story had a few more chapters to go. I smiled at him and he smiled back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne and false congratulations. Patricia talked about engagement party planning. Vivian discussed venues. Harold mentioned business opportunities that might arise from the union of our families, though he stumbled over this, clearly unsure what my family could possibly bring to the table. Marcus stayed close to me, playing the role of devoted fiancé with surprising conviction. If I hadn't heard what his mother and sister had said, I might have believed it, but I had heard, and I would never forget when the evening finally ended. Marcus walked me to my car. The night air was cold and clear, and for a moment we just stood there in the driveway, looking at each other. He asked if I was okay. He said he knew his family could be a lot, but he promised they would warm up to me eventually. I said I understood. I said I was just tired. He kissed me goodnight and I drove away from the Whitmore estate, with his ring on my finger and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning I started my research. If there's one thing my job has taught me, it's the power of information data documentation. I spent my days analyzing systems, finding weaknesses, optimizing solutions. I was about to apply those same skills to the Whitmore family, and what I found over the next few days confirmed everything I had heard, and then some. The Whitmore dealerships were indeed in financial trouble, not just a rough patch but serious structural problems. They had expanded too quickly during the boom years, taken on too much debt, and now the bills were coming due. Their main franchise agreement was up for renewal, and the manufacturer was looking at other options. The partnership with Alexandra's family wasn't just strategic. It was desperate, but that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, I found something else. Something that the Whitmores probably thought was hidden forever. Vivian had been embezzling from the family business. The amounts were small at first, hidden in expense reports and petty cash accounts. But over the years they had added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, siphoned off to fund her lifestyle while the company struggled. I printed out everything I found: legal documents, financial statements, records of suspicious transactions. And then I started making phone calls. My grandmother's name still carried weight in certain circles. The business contacts she had cultivated over decades remembered the Graham family with respect. When I reached out, they were happy to talk. One of those contacts happened to know Richard Hartley, and Richard, it turned out, had his own history with the Whitmore family. They had cheated him on a business deal years ago. Nothing illegal, just unethical enough to leave a bitter taste. He had been waiting for an opportunity to even the score. I was about to give him that opportunity. Before we continue, I just want to say something from my heart. This channel means so much to me. And every single like, every comment, every subscription helps more than you know. If you're enjoying this story, would you please take just 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button? It really makes a difference. Thank you. Now back to what happened next. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience and performance. I played the role of the happy fiancée with the skill of an award-winning actress. I attended family dinners at the Whitmore estate. I listened to Patricia's passive-aggressive comments with a smile. I watched Vivian flaunt her designer clothes and expensive jewelry, knowing exactly where the money had come from. And I watched Marcus. He was different now. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. The attentiveness I had once found charming now seemed calculated. The compliments felt rehearsed. And his phone, which he guarded with increasing vigilance, buzzed with messages that he quickly hid from view. I knew who was texting him. I had seen the name flash across his screen more than once: Alexandra. One evening I told Marcus I was working late. Instead, I parked near the restaurant, where he was supposed to be meeting a client. He wasn't meeting a client. He was meeting her. I watched through the window as they sat together at a corner table, their heads close together, their body language unmistakably intimate. At one point he took her hand across the table. At another she laughed at something he said and touched his face. I took photographs not because I needed evidence for any legal purpose, but because I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember exactly who Marcus Whitmore really was. He wasn't just weak, he wasn't just a mama's boy. He was a liar and a cheat, actively maintaining 2 relationships, while his family orchestrated the outcome from behind the scenes. The rage I felt in that moment was white hot and purifying, but I didn't act on it, not yet. Instead, I went home and added the photographs to my growing file. Richard and I had been meeting regularly, always in secret. He had his own documentation of the Whitmores' questionable business practices. He knew people who had been hurt by their dealings over the years. He was more than willing to help bring them down. But he asked me why. He said he understood his own motivations, but he wanted to know mine. Was this just about revenge? Or was it something more? I thought about his question for a long time before I answered. I said it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, I said. The Whitmores had spent their lives using their money and position to manipulate people. They treated anyone they deemed beneath them as disposable. They were raising Marcus to be the same way, and they would keep doing it to others long after I was gone. I said someone needed to show them that their money couldn't protect them from consequences. Richard nodded slowly. He said, "My grandmother would be proud." That was the moment